and pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to this event, a presentation by Ambassador Peter Secchia, co-sponsored by the Yale College Italian Society and the National Italian American Foundation. If I can just say a few words about the organization before we begin. The NIAF is the major advocate in Washington, D.C. for Italian Americans. For nearly 20 years, they have worked to positively promote the image of Italian Americans throughout the country and the world. The Yale College Italian Society was founded 2 short years ago in April 1993 when 6 undergraduates came together in a classroom with just an idea to start an organization dedicated to the celebration of the Italian culture here on the Yale campus. And here in April 1995, we are sponsoring a presentation by the former ambassador, so we were very pleased. I'd like to take this opportunity to quickly thank all our community members who support the Yale College Italian Society and the National Italian American Foundation. And specifically for tonight's event, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the officers of the Yale College Italian Society who are present here tonight, as well as Mr. Frank Grazioso, who is the Regional Vice President for NIAF for New England, as well as Serena Cantoni, who's based in the Washington, D.C. office of NIAF, as well as the Association of Yale Alumni, who generously allowed us to use their building here tonight, and the Office of Public Affairs at Yale University. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the current president of the Yale College Italian Society, Ignatius Grande, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you. It's a great pleasure that I introduce you tonight here, the Honorable Peter F. Secchia. Mr. Secchia served as United States Ambassador to Italy from June 1989 through January 1993. He was hailed for his discretion, endless work hours, and ceaseless travel throughout the country, and presented with the Cavaliere di Gran Croce, or the Knight of the Great Cross. This is the Republic of Italy's highest award, given only on rare occasions for exceptional service in international affairs. He also received the Department of State Distinguished Honor Award for having a major impact on U.S. foreign policy. He was the only serving U.S. ambassador to receive this award in many years, an honor rarely accorded to non-career ambassadors. Ambassador Secchia is a close and personal friend and advisor to President Gerald R. Ford. He served on the National Advisory Committee of the 88th George Bush for President Committee, and he also founded the Lake Michigan Conference, West Michigan's largest fundraiser in the late 80s for the Michigan Republican Party. Ambassador Secchia is a member of the National Italian American Foundation Council of 1000. He was founding president of the West Michigan Lodge of the Order of Sons of Italy in America, which is Michigan's largest organization of Italian American men and women. Mr. Secchia currently serves as chair of the board of Universal Forest Products Incorporated and the River City Food Company. In addition, he was recently named as Michigan's Entrepreneur of the Year. Ambassador Secchia has 4 children and currently lives in East Grand Rapids, Michigan with his wife Joan. And it is now with my distinct pleasure that I present to you Ambassador Peter Secchia to speak on Italy and America.
Who I met when I was here with President Cossiga in October of 1989, and the President of the Republic of Italy came. It was a very unique experience, and I know you want to hear about the modern Italy and a few thoughts, but I think in the questions and answers, if someone wants to bring up that particular visit, I have a cute story that goes with that. To see Joe Palmata in the audience is unbelievable, because Joe's book I read before I went to Rome. I was told that it would be beneficial. I found that Joe Palmata was wonderful with some of the advice that he gave so many people in all the years that he's traveled back and forth. I just was surprised to see Joe when I came in the audience, but I guess you are still connected here with the university. I'm the kind of guy who went back to Michigan, and I'm writing checks to universities daily because we have 4 children all still going to school. So I'm only familiar with those universities at this particular time. But it's nice to be here. Nice to see you again, Bishop and Frank and everybody for being here. You know, someone once said that the only people who are ever crying for change still sleep in a bassinet. We hardly hear it later in life, and in most cases, especially in some of our older nations, change is very difficult. And sometimes we in America are a bit stubborn about the direction we take. And an experience such as the one that I enjoyed, living in a foreign country, can certainly give you a new perspective. When you come back home, you're a little more flexible about changing course. You must protect the traditions, some of which I've seen tonight in this beautiful campus, and some of the way your colleges are organized. We find in business today and in government and in our own social life, we're in the world of the telecomando, which is an Italian word for the commander for the television set, the telecomando. My children can change channels faster than I even know what they've already turned off. They know what they were just watching. And we find in today's world, the generation coming up behind us is an instant change, prepared for instant change in a very mobile world. And yet we, who are of that senior generation, wonder why we have to make these changes. And I remember very well one time when I was down in Naples visiting SIG South, Commander-in-Chief Southern Forces of NATO, Admiral John Howe, who later ended up in Somalia as Boutros Boutros-Ghali, a senior man, and who before that served in the Bush White House as a deputy to Brent Scowcroft, National Security Advisor. And in Admiral Howe's office, there was a magazine called Proceedings. It's a naval magazine, and it had a story. I remember when something like this about 2 very large American naval ships were sailing through the Straits of Messina, and it was foggy in the storms, and it was getting late and dark, and the senior captain asked the other ship to fall behind, and he remained on the bridge, and as he went forward, you know he was heading off toward Lampedusa, in probably the only area of any turmoil in the Mediterranean, which would have been at that time north of Libya, off the coast of Algeria. And as they were sailing along, the starboard watch noticed a light up forward and reported back that light on the starboard side, sir. And the captain said, well, is it steady or moving across our bow? And of course they exchanged, and the watchman said, steady, sir. And the captain said, well, please radio them to alter their course 20 degrees. Change their course, please. Message came back, said, you should change your course. The captain wasn't real happy about this. He said, you tell them I'm a captain of the American Navy, the most powerful Navy in the world, they should change their course. The message came back, I'm sorry, sir, you change your course. And the captain was absolutely furious. He said, you tell them that this is a battleship. It's a very large and powerful ship. They will change their course. And the message came back and said, I'm sorry, sir. We know you're a battleship, but you must change your course. You see, sir, we are a lighthouse. Well, I think we find in life, whether you're a student like Ignatius or you're a senior citizen like those of us who have already retired from being a G7 ambassador, we find that sometimes people do not listen to each other, and joint participation becomes impossible. And in today's world, there's a lot for business people to think about with a shrinking global travel time, and increasing global economy, and huge new markets are opening, boiling with opportunity for the business or industry willing to invest a little thought and effort. But we have to be creative today, and we have to understand the culture of the nations we're penetrating. And I remember often a saying I heard when I was in school that B.F. Skinner said the real question is not whether machines think, but whether men do. And I thought that the first recipe for success that I saw from Americans who were visiting in Italy was that time is flying by, so we have to use it wisely, yet we must take that time to understand their culture and then be decisive, because I think the Italians would welcome any American business venture. And I once saw a sign in the cattle country of Tuscany, and it said in Italian, which I'll translate, it said, don't try to cross this field in anything less than 9.9 seconds because the bull can do it in 10 seconds flat. And the Italians have a humorous way of getting their message across, and those of us who are second or third generation Italian Americans know very well that wonderful grandfather or grandmother or father or mother who gave you these parables and these sayings, who told you how much they loved this country, tried to explain to you how they remembered their country. But we have to put all this in proper context, because a few years ago, as in 1945, a war just ended. And I'm not speaking about the Gulf War, I'm speaking about the Cold War. And there may have been fewer war dead in that particular war, but the world allocated far more greater resources and more industrial power to that particular war than any war in history. And as in the past, the post-war adjustments will be painful, not just in the industrial West, but for nations like Italy. Now, not economically a problem, but politically a problem. The economic devastation of World War II was replaced with the Marshall Plan and other similar economic aid plans. And just like in the late 1940s, economic aid is needed in many countries. Remember, this time it's Eastern Europe and maybe Yugoslavia, the Commonwealth of Independent States, not to mention what's happened in Somalia and other African countries, because they're no longer able to negotiate their position between two world superpowers, because there's currently only one. But also, as in the late 1940s, the world's political leaders are under immense pressure to produce change. And no one has really described it in all the editorials that I've read or the articles that I've read. We just know that everybody seeks the offerings that change brings. And if you think about it for a minute, after climbing aboard a tank in Red Square, Yeltsin stared down those seeking a return to repression. Gorbachev was out. The Soviet people wanted change. After 75 years of communism, the former Soviet people wanted to try a market economy. Some wanted it to be painless. We all know that's impossible. Joan and I were in Moscow 2 years ago, last month, and we saw many of Yeltsin's citizens cursing him for the high price of now unsubsidized bread, and worried about their army, their currency, the security of their future. But you see, here in America, we only know about the aid that we feel that we must put forth. Those who live in and around those nations have other difficulties. And it's very difficult to put in perspective to a young person like a student in this young club here when you don't have the opportunity, as I did, to see it from that side. But a few months ago, I had a chance to chat with Sergei Khrushchev, son of the former premier, who lives here in Connecticut somewhere, I believe. And he had told me that it wasn't communism versus democracy that brought about the fall of the Soviet Empire. He said it was central planning versus free thinking, and central planning lost. And in our visit to Moscow, a very high-ranking member of the Soviet government told me, and he is today Deputy Foreign Minister, or was, and has recently gone to the court of St. James, I believe, Anatoly Adonishin, who was a hardline negotiator in the later years of Stalin, but is now getting near the final years of his service. I remember he told me, he said, Peter, he said, we are a peace-loving nation. We are the world's largest peace-loving nation. He said, our army is in such bad shape, we have to be peace-loving. And when you hear that from people at the highest levels, you recognize that it boils down to the same old security issue and economic issues of employment and the education of its young people. And you recognize that the Soviet Union and Russia are not the only society in search of change. Because you see, even here in the United States, because this war has ended, we clamor for change. Congress is in disfavor. The incumbents are out. Liberals debate a social dividend. President Bush had his New World Order. Today's government is trying to respond to an I deserve a better life for me attitude of the citizens. And of course, the better life is what we all know drives our enterprise system. But you see, if you put it all in context, whether it's America today or the Soviet Union of 1989 or the England of post-World War II, that change, that traditional post-war change or post-war demand for instant change may explain why after the magnificent leadership Winston Churchill gave his country, soon after that victory, after his brilliant statesmanship, they put him out of office. And don't forget, in 1948, Roosevelt's successor and a man today recognized as one of our great presidents, Harry Truman, only beat Tom Dewey by a handful of votes. So why should today be any different? Every young child knows that after a storm has passed, a local fishing pond, all God's creatures come out and they look for their place in the sun. That's when we were kids, we'd catch the frogs and the snakes because they'd all come out for that moment in the sun. The clouds were parting, the evil empire has dissipated, we were all looking for our place in the sun. Whether it's the ethnic minorities of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the tribal leaders of Somalia, or the French Canadians in Quebec, change is demanded everywhere, from Haiti to Armenia. And in Italy, it is no different. After 45 years of leadership, President Giulio Andreotti is totally out of government. He wasn't even nominated to be the president of the republic, his lifelong dream, following the term of Cossiga. And his 45-year-old enemies began throwing accusation after accusation at him. It wasn't any different in Italy than it is anywhere else. France is demanding radical change. President Mitterrand is in trouble within his own party. After suffering months of hearing, "We want change," demands by Ross Perot and Pat Buchanan, President Bush suffered a stinging defeat. Chancellor Kohl presided over the triumphant reunification of Germany. It was widely praised then, but today the cost of that reunification may soon cause the dismantling of his political coalition. Gorbachev freed the Soviets, now he's out. Some believe Yeltsin may soon follow. And Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, at the center of the world stage for so long, was forced out of office not so long after the curtain fell. And with change happening all around us, it's time to think and understand where our future markets will be and who our real friends are. You see, we have to know the basic premise of democracy that doesn't require agreement. Nobody has ever said that democracy should not have an occasional gridlock or a vitriolic and excited debate. I remember President Ford told me when I was a young political worker for him, he said, "Peter, we have to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable." And that's the tenet, the premise of democracy. But you must participate. Nobody ever said we had to agree. We just have to participate. And you see, participation brings new voters and new ideas, and there'll always be change in government. And that said, we must consider that the world as we know it today will probably soon not exist. I talked to an MBA class last week in Michigan at Grand Valley State University, and I heard in a futurist speech out in California a year ago, and I reminded them that of the 120 nations that currently exist in the United Nations, by the time this generation of young people is ready to retire, there'll be almost 1,000 nations. There'll be flags and armies that you've never heard of. There'll be constant change. Because as the world becomes more complex and as the economies become bigger, more local diversification becomes more important. Big companies are downsizing. Only 14% of the exports we currently have are coming from Fortune 500 industrial companies. And the world as we know it will soon to exist. But the friends that we have will always be there if we treat them properly. And my particular talk tonight is on one of those distinct and honorable friends and allies that we've had for many years. Rome is changing too. The Italian political scene is changing drastically. And we could spend 3 hours tonight talking about the changes in the political parties and what brought them about. But I want to talk about the general picture of the world as it's changing from both an economic and trade point of view, but also from what is happening on the political and religious side of that. You know, my last year in Rome, a shocking statistic, but my last year in Rome, the maternity wards in all of the Rome hospitals, the home of the Vatican, the heart of Catholicism, they reported the most popular boy's name issued in their hospitals was Mohammed. A distinct change for the eternal city. And 4 years ago, how many of you had ever heard of Bosnia-Herzegovina, or Nagorno-Karabakh, or Mogadishu? Change is coming to this world and is changing fast. And Italy sits right smack in the middle of that. A peninsula of tranquility and beauty, a cultural mecca that is surrounded by turmoil and instability. To the east, Yugoslavia. To the far east, to the southeast, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, the south, Algeria, Libya. And what will happen in French Morocco after this king passes, who knows? Italy with its allies to the north who are neutrals, being Switzerland and Austria, with other northern European countries who look down their nose at that particular beautiful country over the years of many historical problems. Change is coming to this world, and change is coming fast. And I think the Italians are looking to America for that friendship that they believe they earned and deserve. And I think I have my most fun going around talking to young Italian Americans or people who are interested in Italy, and hoping that we continue to teach our children the history and the heritage of our friends and allies, and we take politically, we take particular significance to this particular relationship, because Italy is known more to those who don't know Italy for its changes in government, for its strikes, for its food, its music, and its art. It's seldom viewed as it really is. A rock, a strong, reliable, consistent ally. A partner in NATO, the United States has never found a problem. And let me refresh your memory a minute, because in 1967, when Charles de Gaulle decided he didn't want the NATO forces, the Sixth Fleet, to stay in Villefranche, and he expelled them, and of course decided that he still, as a French leader, wanted to rule NATO, but that he didn't want to put any troops into that particular alliance. The Italians gave us Gaeta outside of Naples for the base of the Sixth Fleet, which still exists today, which is the backbone of protecting that particular stream of commerce in the Mediterranean, was also the support unit for the recent Gulf War, where 50% of our troops went through Italy on the way to the Gulf War, and over 60 or 70, I can't remember the number now, of our logistics went through Sigonella, Sicily. And seldom do Americans understand that not only in 1967 did Italy give us Gaeta for the Sixth Fleet and has supported their presence all these years, but that in 1979, when we had to deploy Glickens, the ground-launched cruise missiles, we were in the height of the Cold War. We knew every base where the Russians had, or the Soviets had their SSTs. We knew the platforms, and we monitored. We monitored to watch for the launching. They did the same with us. But we needed to base our Glickens, our ground-launched cruise missiles, in Europe. None of our allies would give us a base. Who gave us a base? The Italians. And in 1982 or 83, when we began to deploy at Comiso in the mountains of Sicily, there was a lot of pressure on the Italian government not to allow the deployment. The Italians went forward, they deployed, the rest of Europe followed suit, and we put our missiles in other countries, we put our stockpiles in other locations. The Russians began to back down. A few short years later, when we came up with the Slickums, the sea-launched cruise missiles, and we put more platforms on the seas, and more platforms on our Alcons, our air-launched cruise missiles, the Soviets knew it was over. And the Italians had been the first nation to support us in that particular move. In 1991, during my mandate in Rome, we had the Gulf War about to commence. None of our rapid deployment partners in Europe had honored their NATO agreement. We had two good allies in Europe who were supposed to rapidly deploy in times like this on a vote of the Council to put their airplanes into insular Turkey to protect that flank of NATO. It was the Italians, the first country, after the others with their more modern aircraft. It was the Italians who deployed their Tornados, not the oldest and most effective aircraft in NATO by any stretch of the imagination, but very well-trained pilots and a very well-disciplined corps. They went to Insula, in spite of the heat they took from more of their pacifist neighbors. They knew that they had a job to do, and they made a commitment. So you see, this is a story that most people don't realize about Italy when it comes to the strongest and most faithful, most effective alliance known in the history of man that kept peace in Europe for 50 years. Probably never before was a 50-year period without a war in Europe. but it was the NATO alliance of which Italy is a major component. And only recently was almost another first when Admiral Guido Venturoni fell one vote shy of being elected chairman of the Defense Committee of NATO. And had this administration supported Admiral Venturoni, but we supported a different candidate, but this means that Venturoni had the support, the Italian military had the support of the rest of Europe for at least 7 of those votes. Admiral Owens, who was my 6th Fleet commander, has many times told me, if you don't know Bill Owens, he is the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff now under General Shalikashvili in Washington. Bill Owens was the 6th Fleet commander during my years. Bill has told me over and over again of the wonderful cooperation that he received in the navies and how closely they worked together. And Bill Owens, I don't know if you read the New York Times recently, had a story about him, how he's setting new standards in the American military. And let me say here on a campus where quite often the military doesn't have the respect that I personally think it should have. The military leaders I worked with in Europe, the 4-star generals and admirals, they are the most peace-loving, caring, educated, and kind people that I ever met. They're a wonderful bunch of human beings who really care about people. And they command the army that has trained, kept the Kurds fed and has brought food to starving Somalians. But they control the same army and Air Force and Navy that was able to send Saddam Hussein back to his bunker. These are a wonderful bunch of well-trained human beings, as are your intelligence service people. And where do they have the best cooperation? In Italy. Where do we have joint commands on 6th Fleet task forces where the Italian ship Garibaldi will take command of an American task force? Never before done. Never have American military forces ever let a flag officer of another nation command their troops. Only it happened in Italy first under Admiral Bill Owens. He said it was a magnificent relationship. We've done the same with our air bases. The jets that are flying today over Bosnia are flying out of Aviano in northern Italy. Our AWACS, which are watching the Adriatic, are flying out of Italy. 20 years ago, this would have been unheard of. Today, an outstanding alliance on the military side. On the business side, I think you have to know that Italy is the 5th largest economy in the free world. A magnificent turnaround when you think that in 1945, Boys Town of Rome had to be formed and pull kids out of caves and feed families that were starving, and recognizing this was an agrarian agricultural community all over Italy. And 45 years later, it's the 5th largest economy in the free world, in spite of the problems that they had rebuilding their country. And no one would say, if they knew the modern Italy, that there's any consistency in foreign policy, but they're wrong, wrong, wrong. Because Italy has had changes in government doesn't mean they've had changes in policy. We sometimes don't change government and have many changes in policy. In one administration, we might change our mind 3 times on how to handle a Bosnia problem or how to handle another problem in another part of the world. The Italians' foreign policy has been consistent. Anyone who's been in the leadership in the United States government will tell you that. But America, like any other country or like any father or mother, you seem to pay less attention to your good children and more attention to the problem children. And the United States seems to pay more attention to countries that give us problems than it does to countries that seem to be our great and loyal friend. And when you think about all the leaders, and you read in the paper of the 52 governments or 53 now that Italy's had, it's hard to realize that they have had fewer different leaders since the World War II than we have had. They have had 50-some different governments, but people like Giulio Andreotti, the Prime Minister or President of the Council, 7 different times. So they've had fewer different leaders, a more consistent foreign policy. Now, if you're in business, or you're trying to work in a community or in a faculty, it's nice to know that you have consistent policies being held by your peers or your associates. So Italy has become a magnificent associate on the political side as well as the military and business side. And you see there's a deep root, too, that comes, and I don't know where it comes from. There's a wonderful love of America in Italy. It wasn't me, it was the desk I rented. A magnificent chair to sit in. It's very hard not to think that you are good and you are important, but you're not. It's the flag that you stand in front of that is so inspiring to the Italians. There's a great love affair between the Italian people and the American form of government. I used to think that our system, with its warts and blemishes, could be embarrassing. Can you imagine as a European watching our convention on television, watching learned businessmen with buttons all over them, or senior citizens with silly hats on, or former presidents swaying to the music of an upbeat campaign band, stepping on balloons, going bang, bang. And you think, oh my God, that's my country, because you'd go to the Italian conventions and everybody'd be in a blue suit, buttoned up, very formal, very polite, very cultured. And then you realize that they loved our politics, and they despised their politics, the people. And when you tried to find out why, it was because our politics, we talk about ideas. The freedom of the press that allows us to criticize ourselves, this self-introspection. The fact that the young people at our conventions can voice what they want to voice, and the television will listen to them, and that the senior citizens are still involved, and that people are talking about ideas. Where the Italian convention, in 4 years, I mean, Joe has seen it, in 4 years I never saw abortion debated on Italian politics. I never saw the politics of emotion debated. The political debates were always over who would control the ministry of the railroads and appoint the most jobs, or who would be involved with the Ministry of Labor and be able to control certain regulations. The Italians love our system. For some reason it goes way back, and we all have different opinions of that. They love our country because, see, America to them still is what many people think has ended, and I don't happen to agree with that. But we are a nation of people who can be what they can be, not who has to be what they are. Where Europe and Africa and many of the older nations are to this day not a nation of can-be's. And as I watched them and I learned from them, I learned I was a very fortunate person to have that bloodline that had said to me, as my grandfather did many years ago, my country is beautiful. My country is changing. And my country changed, and that's why I left it. And I had to go back and find for myself. And I would encourage all of you who have an interest in it, if you haven't, to visit and to understand why it is they have this affection. And to understand that they are a very courageous people. Do you know that in all the terrorism we've read about, and I think some of you can remember Naples, USO blowing the bomb. You might remember, well, you know, Penn M103 is still hanging out there, but in Athens, Frankfurt. We've had terrorists captured all over the world. But never once did we have a nation with the courage to extradite that terrorist to our country to stand trial. And when the Italians gave up Al-Jawari in 1992, that was the first time in history we'd ever been able to bring an Arab terrorist back to our country. We couldn't go public with it at the time because there were big threats and the Arab terrorists were quite active. And what part of the deal was we just sent him home. But it was probably the reason that we didn't have much terrorist problem over the next 2 to 3 years, until recently what happened in Pakistan. The Pakistanis allowed us to come in and take a terrorist out, and of course there is retribution that follows. At the time of Al-Jawari's extradition, the courageous Italians had been threatened if they would lose a few ambassadors if they did this. They did it anyway. The Italians were the first to allow AT&T and our telecom companies to come in and create partnerships in cellular telephones and satellite. The Italians worked side by side with us on the first satellite launching of the tethered satellite operation. They lead the world in magnetics, burning plasma, clean fission, industries that are on the cutting edge of tomorrow's future. And who do they like as a partner? Us, the United States, you. They're leaders, but they recognize that they need good friends like us. And maybe it's a shame that we can't recognize that we have good friends like them and do enough. So we could support Renato Ruggiero to be chairman of the World Trade Organization instead of supporting Salinas who 2 days after I get in a deep conversation with our government, find out that Salinas' brother is indicted. 3 days later, Salinas drops out, and Renato Ruggiero is now the president, who writes me a handwritten note and says, I don't understand why your country didn't support me. Renato Ruggiero was the Minister of Commerce during my first 2 years in Rome. We must learn who our friends are. And I guess my speech tonight, as I go around in modern Italy, is sometimes more emotional than others. Tonight I'm surrounded with many Italian Americans that I feel are friendly to this particular cause. But I think it's very important that we get this recognition. I think it's also fun to tell you a few interesting stories. And one was great because after we arrived in Rome, I mean, let me tell you, the Senate confirmation process is no picnic for anybody, and mine was worse than most. Someone wrote a letter to the editor about you in 1943. They'll find it during the Senate confirmation hearing. And they interviewed my high school girlfriends from 1954. Thank God I didn't have any good moves. They talked to everybody. It was just terrible. When I arrived, I figured, oh my God, they're going to say, here's this fool. And it was amazing, the reception. Again, it wasn't me. You represent that flag, a beautiful flag. And I told my wife after a few days, isn't this amazing? Every place we went, our armored car would pull up, a police car in front, a police car in back, and police everywhere. Italians would never get, like an American would be, hey, what are you doing, taking my parking place, you know, buzz off. Italians would go, hey, eccellenza, buongiorno, I want to see it. I was very polite. Taking pictures, everybody take my picture with you. Wonderful. Well, because this was a period of high terrorist alert, I had to leave for the office at a different time. And the way we avoid terrorists nowadays is not by lots of armor, it's just by eliminating any patterns. You go to work at a different time every morning. You might leave at 6:30 one morning, at 7:30 the next, at 8:30 the next, a different car. You go out a different gate, you take a different route. You pull into a different gate at the embassy. So there just is no pattern. And I told my wife, I said, it's amazing, honey, when I go out that front gate in the morning, there's a big iron gate at Villa Avenue. And they would buzz the gate when I was leaving the house. And we would hit that gate at about 25 miles an hour, and the gate would swing open. And there'd be a police car already out there that sat there 24 hours a day. And those policemen would get out in their flak jackets and stop all the traffic. Gate would swing open. Another police car would come out in front of me and block another street. My car would come out about 30 miles an hour and turn the corner. And behind me, a car would come out with 3 Digos, which is the Italian anti-terrorist police, hanging out the windows with their machine guns. And I said to my wife, I said, these people are amazing. She said, well, what do you mean? I said, honey, every place we go, there's a crowd, they're so nice, they want to see us. And it was just neat. My wife said, really? I said, yeah, in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, if I go out the gate, there they are, waiting for this spectacle. She said, on the right? I said, yeah. She says, Peter, that's a bus stop. We had to learn a lot, and they were very good at teaching us. Embassy Rome had 58 government agencies, from the Drug Enforcement Agency to LEGAT to Defense Intelligence Agency to Special Collection Posts, you name it. We had everything. And I only wish my late father was alive, because I even had my own IRS agent. And I would love to have Dad meet my own pet IRS agent. There were wonderful people like Giovanni Falcone, who we talked about at dinner tonight, and who had dinner with us at Villa Taverna on a Thursday night. And we were talking about great accomplishments he was making. On Friday afternoon, Joan and I flew to Portofino to visit some friends. On Saturday afternoon, my Digos told me that he had been blown up with his wife and 3 of his Digos. On a Saturday afternoon in May, a Navy plane came up to pick me up, take me down to the funeral. And it was the most moving ceremony, demonstrations of people afterwards, of people who were fed up, tired of what had happened, the post-fascist years, the laws that didn't allow wiretapping, didn't allow the tracing of family wealth, laws that didn't allow secret police. You know, police in the post-fascist years always had to wear uniforms, always had to travel in marked cars. And I believe early on they always had to have their lights on whether they were chasing anybody or not. There was just no such thing. From the fascist years that I'm here in the middle of the night to take your father away because he's against the government. They passed all these overreactive laws. And for 45 years organized crime flourished because there was no wiretapping. There was no undercover police work. There were no police out of uniform. There was no tracing of funds. There was no electronic banking system. After Giovanni Falcone's death, Minister Martelli, who was the Socialist Minister of Justice at the time, and Minister Enzo Scotti, who was Minister of the Interior, which is the senior police organization, worked with us to change their laws, to give them something similar to our RICO law, to change some of these. And before I left Rome, 6 months after Giovanni Falcone's death, we had brought in forensic teams. We did nothing with Falcone. We found nothing, because by the time we got there were already tourist stands set up and chartered buses. The Queen of England had stopped by with her yacht and took all her friends. There was just nothing left. It had rained, it had wind had blown, there was no evidence left. The American FBI people came in after the Borsellino assassination 3 months later, and within 60 or 90 days they had identified the weapons, the bombs, they had found out where the car came from, where it was stolen, who had stolen it, and meantime we had changed the rules on wiretapping surveillance, and we had found Toto Riina. 28 years the leader of the mafia had been under investigation, and you could never catch him because it'd be pretty easy to hide from the police. If they all had to wear uniforms, they had to have a light on their car, and you bought a house at the top of a mountain. There was a 20-minute drive to get up to your place. You just went out the back door after about 18 and a half minutes, and they could never catch anybody. But they caught Toto Riina. They caught his lieutenants, matched up the DNA with cigarette butts at the site of the Falcone assassination. And I'm happy to tell you that to this day a picture sits on my wall in my office of this great man who did everything, who stood for something in Italy that so many people stand for, that most of our friends here in the United States don't recognize, the true integrity and class and culture of Italy that says what's right is right. And they do believe in what's right. And to know Italy is to love Italy. And I'm happy that you had me here tonight. And I would like very much to end this with one particular saying for these young people in this club. My Marine Corps drill instructor at Paris Island told me this one, and I hope that you remember it. It says that 10% of the people make things happen. You know, you can make things happen. You can help improve this relationship. 10% of people make things happen, 40% of people watch things happen, 50% of people wonder what the hell happened. You've got to choose which group you want to be in. Thank you very much. Joe can't ask me because he has tough questions. Yes, Bishop.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I understand we're Paisani, my ancestry is from Piemonte too.
Yes.
What was the relationship that you had as ambassador with the American ambassador to the Vatican while you were there?
The question is, what was my relationship with the ambassador to the Vatican? Tom Milady was the ambassador. Shakespeare was the ambassador when I arrived, and he was replaced later with Tom Milady, who had come from near here. He had been the president of Sacred Heart
University in Bridgeport.
The Vatican embassy is a very small embassy. I think there's 16 people as compared to ours, which is over 1,000. They cannot have any commercial activity, nor do they have any intelligence activity, and obviously no military. Military, commercial, and intelligence was about 70% of my time. So we had really nothing in common then. But I worked closely with Tom. We provided his administrative support. His Marine Guards were working with ours. We had a few conflicts. During the Gulf War, the Holy Father made 43 speeches which were against what we were doing. And there were times when Tom, as a dedicated Catholic, had a difficult time not following the Holy Father or disagreeing with Father Soldano, Cardinal Soldano at the time as a foreign minister. But the closest time we had to work was an interesting time. It was Christmas Eve. Does anybody remember what happened on Christmas Eve? Was 90 or 91? During Mass, happened in Panama. We could not find Noriega, but we found him Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Where was he? In the Papal Nuncio's residence in Panama. And when they tried to call our embassy to tell him that they had discovered Noriega, this was a touchy situation because he was on embassy property. We needed the Holy Father's permission to either invade or to get his people out, but we were going to go in and get this man, or we were going to surround that building for quite a few years. And it was a very difficult situation, so they couldn't get Tom, because this is the true story of diplomatic work. We had a budget cut back and they took away his car phone. Oh, yeah, we had some wonderful budget. And they have nice words over there, like it's called a RIF. That's a reduction in force. It's a layoff over here, it's a RIF. In the diplomacy situation. But Tom didn't know, and Tom had gone earlier to the Christmas Eve Mass. And so I took the call, and I came to midnight Mass, and Joan and I had seats, very prominent seats. And 3 times during the 2-hour service, I had a tap on my shoulder to go out, to go underneath, and the only way out to get to where my car was, where my car phone was underneath where the Holy Father's chair was. So on this beautiful Mass, I'm tiptoeing underneath, and right in the middle of St. Peter's is this, and I'm looking up, and there's the robes and the feet, and there's this man talking in about his 17th language, giving the same thing over to, and I'm tiptoeing out. My wife's embarrassed. Phone call. Get an Italian lawyer who speaks English, who can work with us, because we've got to file papers, diplomatic papers to get. So during the Mass, I'm trying to get a lawyer lined up. I'm trying to hire somebody who can file the papers. The military surrounded the building. The war is going on in Panama. And the Holy Father's up there just going on with what he doesn't know yet that we found Noriega in his building. Tom doesn't know yet. And I'm supposed to tell the two of them when the service is over. Now, if you've ever gone to midnight Mass, you don't just walk out in the middle of the church and say, hey, excuse me, Holy Father, I got a message for you. I mean, he's gone with all of his entourage, and everybody else was gone. And Joan and I were leaving the next morning for Phuket, Thailand, with our family for the holidays. This was a marvelous position to be in because it was not my turf. Diplomatic turf is very clearly defined. We were on the Vatican. I do not have any diplomatic presence on the Vatican whatsoever. I was a messenger boy because I had the car phone. But my message was to give it to the ambassador, who then, of course, had to give it to Soldano, Cardinal Soldano, who then had to give it to the Holy Father, who then had to decide whether he was going to try to get Noriega out of that particular building. That was probably the most work I did with. We did do social events together from time to time because of budget constraints, but technically his work is really with the church, and the church is their own particular nation and their son. Yes, sir.
What was that funny story you were going to tell us?
Oh, funny story I was going to tell you. This is a classic story. I was a new ambassador in the spring of '89. In the fall of '89, 3 months into my term, still learning the culture, still trying to figure the culture of the State Department, not just the culture of Italy. And I am to come to Washington because Cossiga's coming. So I get to the White House, and of course they are wonderfully generous. They fly you over on a tourist plane all night. You got to fight. You can't take taxis. You can't tip. You can't. I mean, you're trying to. My first time, I've been a businessman for 30 years. I got to get to the White House. I get to the White House, and they got an X in the ground for me to stand on. So I stand on the X. But nobody told me when I leave the X. They just said stand on the X. Well, Cossiga comes in. There's this big dramatic welcome, and the cannons are shooting off, and these wonderful speeches. And I had become a friend of Francesco Cossiga, and he was Ambassador Secchia, ciao Peter, he's a very friendly kind of guy. And I thought, very friendly. Can I get off the X now? Everybody else left. and there was no car for me. And then I find out that the embassy doesn't give you cars when you're in the United States. When you're in the United States, you take taxis, you hitchhike, whatever you do. In Italy, I had a limousine, police cars in front of me, police cars behind me. I don't think I opened the door for 4 years. But here I get home and it's, hey, get a cab, buddy. And I went away, so everybody was leaving. Cosiga leaves, and I turn to somebody and says, do I go now? Yeah, you got to get back. You're having lunch with Baker. I said, yeah. I said, how do I get there? He said, well, I don't know. And they left. So this voice comes out and says, Secchia, what are you doing here? It's President Bush. I said, well, I want to know the truth. I don't have a car, and I got to get to him. He says, come on in, let's chat for a while. I said, I can't. I got to be late. Baker's my boss. You might run the country, but he's my boss. I got to go to lunch. He says, come on in, chat. I said, I can't. So he says, I'll get you a ride. So he gets somebody to drive me to the embassy. After the embassy, I have to go to Blair House to meet Cosiga to go to Yale. He's coming here. And we're going to stop in New York and do an event. And then I'm flying to Rome. He's coming up here for a day, and then he's gone. I have no way to get from the State Department to Blair House. So I call motor pool, and they don't have any cars. So my desk officer says, I'll take you. Great. You go downstairs. He's got a little compact mini car with one of those giant American baby seats in it. The seat was bigger than half his car. And I have to get in the back because the seat takes up half the front seat, and he's the driver. So I'm in the back with I'm the ambassador. I'm going to the Blair House. I just went to the White House. I'm a really important guy, right? I'm riding in the back of this car. I got rattles back there and toys and boxes and shopping bags. And we get to Blair House, and I said to him, I said, you mind if you lead me off around the corner? All the Italian press was there, and hey, Lasciatori, enjoy inside. Let me off around the corner. I get out my briefcase. I walk around the corner, and I'm in front of Blair House and all the Italian TV. Buongiorno, buongiorno, Lasciatori. And I go in, and we're ready to leave. Cosiga says, Secchia, cavolo di tutto. He says, I want you to come with me to Yale. But, Mr. President, I have a ticket to go on TWA on Tuesday, and you're going Thursday. He says, I'd like you. I call up and said, is an American ambassador ever been invited to go with a president for a private trip? Don't think so. He says, Secchia, I want you to fly home with me on my plane. He's got a 747. I'm going tourist style. Mr. President, call up the State Department. Has this ever happened? No. I get a call back. You can't go with me. What do you mean I can't go with you? So, well, there's a rule that American ambassadors have to fly on American carriers. I said, but I have a ticket on American carrier. I'm going as his guest on his Alitalia 747. There's only 12 seats in first class. I'm going to be up there with 11 of the top Italian leaders. Isn't that marvelous? You know, they'll see I'm a friend of his. They can talk. It's against the rules. Against the rules. So I get on the phone. I call on everybody. I finally got back. The attorney, somebody told me tonight that Andreotti had hired an American attorney. The American attorney he hired, maybe Joe knows, was the attorney for the State Department during this period. He's now representing Andreotti in this issue, and somebody brought it up tonight at dinner. Somebody brought it up. And this particular attorney said to me, he said, that's a wonderful opportunity, go. So they said, but you have to pay for your ticket. Because you're not allowed to accept any gifts from a foreign government. So I had to turn in my ticket, which I couldn't use, and then I had to get on the plane and say, by the way, Mr. President, here's $843 so I can fly with you. And you give me a receipt, please. And so I'm learning how the system works. And the conclusion of this plane was a magnificent trip. I sat next to Bruno Bottai, who was the deputy foreign minister at the time, equivalent to Eagleberger. And we talked about many things. And all of the senior staff and all of the 300 reporters in the back of the plane saw that I was up there with the president, so it was marvelous. And we arrived, Spadolini met us. Great trip. As I'm leaving the plane, a gentleman from Milan, who we had met our first month, who was head of the commerce businessmen up there, I had a luncheon for my wife, and I met him. Peter, Gianfranco. Hey, Gianfranco, how are you? He says, Peter, I want to come visit you. Okay, come visit me. Boom, I'm off. Cosiga's holding on. Home run. Way to go, Peter. Yes. 4 months later, Croxy brings this guy in to be president of the BNL just before the fiasco hits. The big scandal about the BNL. And the Washington Post does this story about how I flew across the Atlantic with this man, Conconi. I was one of 400 people on the plane. He said, ciao. I said, ciao back. But there was a big story, and I was investigated by the chairman of the gentleman from Texas who was thrown out in the last election. I forget his name, chairman of the banking committee. But anyway, that's what happens when, now I have some sympathy for those who are in public life and old. That's my remembrance of my Yale trip. Tonight I went to Maury's and they gave me an Angus steak and I love it. I know, I'll keep you all so long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. That was a very enlightening and entertaining talk you gave us. At this time, the presentation is over, but please join us downstairs for refreshments and mingling with the ambassador and other people in attendance. You can enjoy yourselves. Please pick up any information you would like about the National Italian-American Foundation or the Yale College Science Society here on the table. And please sign our guest book that is being passed around. I'm not exactly sure where it is at this time, but please make every effort to sign that book. Thank you very much for coming.